government, just look at what they do. Can't trust the media, they're all full of lies. Once you know a little bit, all hope in you dies. Live free or die.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another exciting edition of Hardfire TV. My name is Cameron Weber. I'm an economist and historian and the producer of Hardfire Media. Today, we are going to discuss two potential solutions to lessen the crime on the subway. We're specifically talking about New York City, but it could be anywhere. I'm not sure. So problems of the city have intensified during the COVID era due to the massive state interventions which have disrupted the fabric of society in many places and in many ways. For example, violent crime in New York City is up 50% since the COVID era began. And you probably know we're filming this July 6th, and on July 4, Independence Day, there were 50 people shot in New York City. On the show today, to help me discuss this, crime on the subway and what to do about it, we've got Marcy Berry. Marcy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Cameron. Thank you for having me.
Marcy and I did a show about homelessness in the city not too long ago, I think.
Right.
So part of the crime has to do with homelessness, obviously. Thank you for coming, Marcy. And we've got Brooklyn, Vlad. Vlad, welcome.
Hi.
Vladimir and I have been discussing the Ukraine situation, right?
Yes.
And specifically about NATO and about sanctions. Our most recent one was about sanctions. Right. So thank you very much. The first idea, which serves as a basis for this discussion, comes from Larry Sharp, who some of you might know is running for the governor of New York for the 2022 election. I learned of this idea from Larry at a Queens Libertarian event just a few days before the shootings down the street here at 36th Street subway. I heard from Vlad right away after that to make sure that I was
worried about you. I know where you are.
And we have a mutual friend who also works at that subway. In our otherwise usually pretty peaceful Sunset Park in Brooklyn. The idea is a simple one, but I want to, and Marcy used to live in San Francisco and is a very prolific writer about problems of the city. So we've been talking about problems in the city for about the last year and a half. The idea is a simple one, but I want to discuss some of the implications. Every subway train has several cars, right? The idea would be to reserve the last car of every train as a safe space. The idea here is that due to many reasons, the subway has become a temporary home to many people, right? Homelessness is up extensively since the COVID era. And like I said, we did a Hardfire show on that you can find on YouTube. To me, okay, so there would be, right, so the last subway car would be a safe space to where there'd be two police officers on every train within eye contact, and then the police officers would escort those who seem to be sleeping on the subway or might have hygiene problems or something like that, and they would escort them to the last car of the subway, leaving the other cars more proper, we could say, less filth, and so a better, cleaner environment in which to ride the subway. So to me, this seems related to broken window policing. This means that if you let minor violations go without legal redress, then people adjust to this and commit more serious and more violent crimes. The idea would be those that, with violent intent on the subway, would see a more orderly and safe environment on the subway trains and may think twice before acting. After a time of this may help to reduce crime over the long term. what do you think of this idea?
Who wants to go first?
What?
Go
Well,
ahead.
in Hardfire, we have a free conversation. Whoever wants to step in.
Okay. Well, let me just step in for a second. The one thing I do know about this theory, by the way, do you support this theory, Cameron?
Why? No. Basically, what I do is I explore for interesting ideas and then talk to others about it who have better ideas. Do I think I spoke to a few people leading up to this, and one person said, no, we have to deal with the homeless problem before we can deal with the problem on the subway. Another person who actually is in the MTA industry said that, no, we don't want to mix the housing administration and the MTA together. In other words, he looked at it from a bureaucratic point of view.
Mhm.
Why should the subway people be involved in a housing problem or a crime problem? So do I think it's a good idea? I think anything is better than what we have now. And so that's why I want to explore it.
Well, I'd like to add too that it's I like how you differentiated that it's a housing problem as well, but it's also, when we're talking about crime, it's also a mental health issue. A lot of have what we see and what we're counting as crime, and really is crime. It is a crime to push people on the subway. But what is the underlying reason for this? Is because people are mentally ill. A lot of these people that we're seeing being pushed in front of the subway. There was a woman who got smeared with feces a couple of months ago in a horrific case that gained all kinds of national attention. These are people who have real mental problems. And part of our problem is that we are not keeping people in mental institutions where they might belong, which is maybe a topic for another case or another study, but it is definitely something that's part of the whole discussion, because we're not talking about regular street crimes that we are usually associate the subway with: chain snatching, purse snatchings, simple assault, playing music too loud. These are people with underlying mental problems, exasperated possibly by drug addictions and homelessness and other social factors.
So Vlad, back to you. Okay, Marcy.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. I agree with Vlad quite a bit in that, yes, the homeless of today have no connection with the homeless of yesterday's pre-1960s. Today, we do have the problem of mental illness and so forth. But I think I want to add the fact that I disagree with the premise that it would be orderly for police to escort people to the last cars.
Yeah.
First of all, a lot of people do not want to go. Compare that to what's happening with people that are offered shelter. They don't want to go there.
Uh-huh.
And so if they don't want to, if they fight going into shelters, they would equally fight going into a segregated place. So I don't abide by that too much, because it seems like you would have, in order for transit to get back, you would have to make transit more appealing, more comfortable. And how can you have transit that's more comfortable? You got the police going back and forth escorting people that might be unruly. So I think that idea needs a lot of work.
Yeah, that's the crux of the argument. I know that Marcy, you have a blog on civil liberties, right?
Yeah, it's justvoteteno.blog.
Yes, justvoteteno.
Justvoteteno.blog.
So, right, the crux of the problem then, and then Vlad asked if I support it. So the caveat there is when I said there would be a police officer whose job it would be to peacefully escort those sleeping on the subway to the last car. In other words, here you're already sleeping on the subway. Would you please come to the last car and do that instead? So is there a peaceful way to do that?
No. No more than there's a peaceful way to take them to the shelters. You know, it's always a
But with
fight.
the shelters, we know that they're run down and unsafe,
Uh-huh.
rat, stuff like that. But these people are already riding on the train, right?
What do you think those cars, those reserved cars for homeless would look like in about 5 minutes?
I'll tell you, for a while, at least during COVID and even before COVID, if you went down to the subway, every single car had at least one homeless person in it. The lack of mental health help for people and room in hospitals or institutions have led to many people being on the street where they're getting no care whatsoever. Now the problem is, as we all know, is we do have civil liberties, and that's where the problem lies. Is where do you draw the line between a person's right to refuse to go to somewhere and then someone who might be a danger to himself or maybe danger to others? And when is that visible? How do you know some person isn't taking their medication? When they How do you know they're not hearing voices telling them push that lady into the subway right now? These are the problems that that's what we're facing right now. But
Mhm.
let me just if I may just add one little caveat to the last car. One thing I do know from speaking to people in transit, in police in transit, virtually all crimes in the subways happen in the last car. Um, so I
Oh
just
my gosh.
And most accidents are the first.
Yeah.
subways avoid the last car. That's where all the trouble happens.
So maybe Larry Sharp doesn't ride the subway. So
Apparently.
Police there, which I can understand why. And that's another thing. If I may add one more thing, is we have a lot of police in New York City. According to the last numbers I looked, we have 36,000 New York City police officers. Yet we have 472 subway stations. Where wouldn't it be prudent to put at least one or two police officers in every one of these stations? Would that be possible? It comes up every year. Every time there's some kind of big push for crime reduction in the subways, I do hear politicians talking about putting police in subway stations. What would you have to say to that?
I talked to our mutual friend about this yesterday, who actually works at a subway station, and you're right, Vlad, they've been debating that in New York, whether you should have one policeman or two on the subway trains so that the police can have eye contact with each other, right? So the policeman's not out there by themselves. So I would agree that if we were to put police on the subway stations, like you said, okay, that's a good start. Two per, but then they're in the stations, not on the trains themselves. But that's a good idea.
Where you can find it at all times. So something if you had that, maybe people would feel a little safer. I don't know, but it's just a thought I had recently.
Yeah. But I think that, just to add one more thing to agree with Vlad, I think that the police can do just so much in the sense that whatever they're permitted to do. If they're not permitted to evict people, as in the case of San Francisco, I need to speak about San Francisco and not North Carolina for the simple reason that here there is no transit, so we don't have a problem. There isn't any. So, we don't have a subway, so there's no point talking about it.
That's
But I lived in San Francisco, where's the BART, and yeah, the police can't do very much. So you can put all the police you want, but if their hands are tied, what good is that?
I'll step in here is what I said before. That's kind of like maybe a little bit like broken window policing. If people get used to the fact that there's two police officers at every subway station consistently over time, maybe crime would get reduced as people become habituated to seeing the police. And right, civil liberties, you don't want to go overly towards the precautionary principle with what's that, red flag laws or whatever, you're innocent until proven guilty, right? So you would have the police there to solve crimes once they've been performed, and that would.
Police are not mental health professionals. That really isn't their job, and it shouldn't be their job. I mean, they're there to prevent crime, and
And
that's another. All it's. I know New York City has been trying to put down social workers within the subway system. I don't know how that program's going, but at least it's a step in addressing what is much of the problem, the mental health issues.
Mhm.
we keep going back to the mental health issues, and I was too young to remember it all that well. But speaking of San Francisco, when I was living in San Francisco and working in Marin County in the early 80s, mid 80s, I understand that the federal government closed down the institutions, the federal institutions for the mentally ill, whoever determines who the mentally ill are and how they end up in the federal institutions. And that everyone says Reagan shut the federal mental health institutions, and that led to homelessness throughout the cities in the 80s and through today. So is the answer to go back to forced incarceration?
Well, you have two choices. You either put the people that are not well, unfortunately, something that we could all of a sudden be facing. You can, right? And we could either put these people away, or you can deal with them in the subway. Which is it? I don't think there's a choice there. And of course, now the Supreme Court has said you can't put people away without their consent. Well, then I guess you deal with them in the subways. I don't think there's any other choice.
Right. So on a consensus, 10 minutes left. We don't like the idea of putting people into the last car. And we like the idea of having two police officers at every station so they can keep their eye on each other, and a presence that people will then become accustomed to and maybe think twice about committing a crime. Can we agree with that?
I agree.
Yes.
Awesome. So 10 minutes left. So now we have a second topic. So number one was Larry Sharp's idea, last car. We didn't like that too much. Increased police presence. Like that. Supreme Court says no mandatory incarceration. So that's not an option. That's good. And broken window policing by having officers' presence known, and that's good.
Can I just throw in one more thing in that topic? Is that as a libertarian, the Second Amendment is an important issue that we like to bring up, and self-defense is important. New York City, which discourages people from owning anything that could defend themselves, even with the recent court ruling that you have a right to carry. Concealed carry, they are already formulating plans to restrict it. And one of the places they will be restricting concealed carry is the subways. I've always maintained that the Second Amendment says what it means what it says. Let people defend themselves, arm the citizenry, and they will be able to defend themselves. And you might not need as much policing as we have. But
I would, sorry about Marcy, do you have anything to say? I would just say that, yes, what Vladimir is proposing is a lot less superficial than what normally is proposed in New York City, Democrat city state, where you try to suppress the supply of guns, which is impossible. And it's a fake solution. So then Vlad's now saying full carry.
Yeah, that's one option. Although that is a huge subject for an entire show, right? In the sense that, yeah, we can propose that, but we're not solving the problem that we're seeing right now. You know, we're saying, yeah, we can defend ourselves, but you know, you got to do something about all these shootings, man. You can't let them go on. So this is the problem.
San Francisco? One of the reasons you left San Francisco is because of the violence?
I'm sorry, what?
Is one of the reasons you left San Francisco is because of the violence?
Well, there wasn't so much violence where I was living. It was just the repressive laws, the dirtiness, the unruliness, the lack of reasoning, and so this is why we just couldn't stand it anymore. Me and my family just up and left.
Yeah, right. It's away from the ownership society towards where everyone's thinking in temporary terms of when's the next bailout or the next crisis or the next something.
Yeah.
The homeowner, you know, instead all these superficial solutions, affordable housing, which isn't affordable when you could just change the zoning laws. I mean, all these are classical liberal ideas that we've talked about many times on the show. So now here's my second idea. This is it's not my original idea, but the second idea I want to talk about to improve the safety of the subway is by privatizing the MTA or the BART. Let me take a step back. Let's call reducing crime a government service or a non-market transaction. Like any government service, it has to be rationed because there is no supply and demand price signal allocating the resource. Although their politicians and their cronies enjoy pretending otherwise, government budgets are not limitless. So the MTA, I wrote something about this in Surf City, the Manhattan Libertarian Party magazine that was available at print. Vlad, do you remember Surf City?
Absolutely. A great magazine.
Very good. But then the insurance for the newspaper boxes got too expensive. So we had to stop doing that. Anyway, so what I said was, why don't we privatize the MTA? So when I wrote a number of years ago, the MTA lost 10 years ago, the MTA lost $1 billion a year. Last year, it lost $5 billion. So in other words, it's the amount of losses has gone up 500% over 10 years. And the debt is greater than 50 billion, up 100% from 25 billion 10 years ago. So, and ridership is down 60% during the COVID era. So why don't we privatize it and rationalize the MTA? And what do I mean by privatize? The way it would work is that you would take the operation of the subway away from the inefficient state corporation without a price signal and open bids for, say, a 50 or 30-year concession to a private company. This would be an open, competitive, and audited bid process. The operator would have to meet certain criteria in order to maintain its license. One of these criteria would be reducing crime to below a certain agreed upon level. Does privatization make sense? And this is, so first thing, does privatization make sense to rationalize a price signal in the subway? Supply and demand, big changes in readership. I guess half Vlad would know, Brooklyn Vlad would know. There, you know, how empty are the buildings in Manhattan?
I've been working from home for a while, but as far as my sources tell me that it's still pretty down. Well, at least downtown Manhattan is pretty empty still, and they still have a ways to go to put people back in because a lot of companies did send their people home and gave them the option, and the ones who have returned have only returned part-time. So virtually everybody I know works 2 days on, 3 days off, or 3 days on, 2 days off.
Yeah, and ridership is down 60%. So, right, doesn't a change need to take place? Does privatization make sense? Prices would have to rise to match the true cost of providing the services, but the operator would have a profit incentive for becoming more efficient, unlike the state operator that we have now, which has nothing to lose. Let's discuss the idea of subway privatization as a solution to subway crime.
Yeah, I believe in privatizing everything. I don't think that the government should be doing anything except what's in the Constitution. So privatizing the MTA would be great. But we need to understand also that anytime you have a privatization, you help me with that word. You would have to understand that they would only serve those that they can obtain a profit from. In other words, they would not be serving, say, people who can't pay that much, as say a subsidized organization would, such as the government would be able to do that, because there is unlimited taxpayer funds. Now, if you say, all right, the private company has all of the ability to do all the things that are necessary to turn a profit, then yeah, that will work, because the private company would only serve those you can pay, would immediately shut down all of the stations to anybody who could not pay, and that will solve everything, except the fact that the poor people couldn't ride. So how do you think that do you think a liberal place like San Francisco or New York will stand for that for 1 minute? No, they would immediately jump. Oh, you gotta serve the people.
Great point, because I believe it'll never be fully privatized, because the government has a vested interest in keeping everybody moving and keeping stations that, like you said, Marcy, would have no purpose being open to be open. So it'll never be a fully privatized system, and government will always have to subsidize some of the ridership. And
some of the ridership.
So we have 1 minute left, and so this is a very good point. Is that the role of government, to make below cost transportation available to people who, especially in a crowded city?
Can I jump in and say how we did it in Argentina, which had, talk about the trains being on time. Man, that fascist government was great. The trains were always on time. But the way we did it was we had first class, second class, third class. Third class and second class were subsidized to a certain extent. First class was not. So if you were rich, you rode first class. It was the most enjoyable thing in the world. Not so rich, second class. Really, really poor, you stood on third class.
That would be
so that worked really well.
That would be that option would be part of the privatization.
Yeah, it really worked.
Vlad, what do you?
Very interesting. Very interesting. Gives me some food for thought.
Right. So I keep getting back to, and then we'll say thank you. I keep getting back to, what is the role for government in society, and is it to provide parks, or can they be privatized? Should it be for mass transportation, or could that be privatized? Roads, schools. I mean, these issues people have been talking about for a long time. So anyway, I would like to thank our guests for participating in today's show about alternative ideas for reducing crime on the subway. Thank you. Marcy.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marcy. Thank you, Cameron. It was a pleasure.
Very well.
It's a pleasure.